Hello, beautiful lights, and welcome to another episode of From a Medium's Perspective. Today, I am absolutely delighted because I am having for the first time on the show in a year and a half a tarot master. And he's not just a tarot master, he is a spiritual advisor. He is priest of the Order of Melchizedek. He uses a lot of interesting tools that are not common to a lot of readers. He uses i-ching and the pendulum. I guess that's a little bit more common. And he uses body mechanics like muscle testing. He works by combining his modalities and often uses astrology and tarot together and oracle cards. He taps in anywhere from past life karma into the future. We have a really similar astrology because we're both fire signs and we both have a Libra moon. He's an Aries and has Scorpio rising and a Libra moon. And I'm Sagittarius with Aquarius rising and a Libra moon. So we should get along just fine today. He started with tarot in 1989. His first deck was the Mythic Tarot. And now he's actually created his own deck, which is the Tarot of the Human Experience. And we'll be talking to him in detail about all kinds of good stuff. One other thing I wanted to let you know is that he has a PhD and that he has been reading since 1992. So he is a seasoned reader, and I am so happy to have him on the show today. His name is Phillip Franklin Young. Welcome, Phillip.
Thank you, Tracy. I appreciate that wonderful introduction.
Oh, you are most worthy. So, in reading about some of the things you do, just for the listeners to clarify some of the stuff, let's just start with i-ching. I don't think too many people are familiar. I taught a little mini workshop on it one time, and it was quite the laborious process. So tell our listeners why that would be and how you use it and, apply it to your readings.
Certainly. The I-ching is from the Book of Changes. That's what the I-ching essentially stands for, is the Book of Changes. And it's made up of 64 hexagrams, which are combinations of trigrams, and each trigram represents something from essentially Chinese philosophy. A trigram might represent the mountains, a trigram might represent a lake or fire. And the way you determine a hexagram is by casting either yarrow sticks or coins. Coins is the more common and easier process. You just use 3 coins to cast the coins. And based on how they appear, heads up, tails up, and the combination that comes up, you're going to get what will either be a solid line, a broken line, a solid line that's called a changing line, and a broken line that's a changing line. You're going to do 6 castings in order to get the hexagram lines, and then from what you get of those lines, you will determine the hexagram that you're supposed to use for the question that you've asked. So I had a client of mine who used this very effectively. She was looking to purchase a house. So she came to me, and she wanted to really ask a very direct question, which was, should I purchase the house at 100 Starmont Drive? And that kind of question with tarot can be a little bit tricky to get a good, clear answer out of. So I directed her to the I-ching, because the book that I use is one by a master, Hu Ching Ni. And the book, when you cast the coins, you come up with a hexagram. You open to that hexagram, and this particular book will actually give you what the presumed answer of that hexagram is for things like buying property, getting married, making a move, which is one of the reasons why I like using this particular text. But it allows you to get pretty much a yes-no answer, or yes but, or no but. And so as she went through 3 properties, so she came to see me 3 times, and it was interesting because the third one was the definite yes one, the first two were no. And what was nice was when she returned, I got some information about the previous reading from her, which was the reason that it came up a no was a good reason. She found out when she decided not to go through with the first property that another problem came up after she decided not to purchase it. So the reading did exactly what it needed to do. But the process is done using coins, and it can be done at a distance. I've worked with people over the phone where all you need is 3 quarters. If you have 3 quarters, I just simply have you cast the quarters, and then we come up with what the lines are, and then we determine the hexagram, and we use that hexagram to answer whatever question you brought to me.
Oh, that's very interesting. We suffered with pipe cleaners, white and black pipe cleaners. I had to throw a lot of allegory and story and all kinds of stuff to keep my students sane during that time. But, it brings up an interesting point that a lot of our listeners might not have thought about, which is that different questions lead to different. If you're not working completely intuitive, psychically or mediumistically, there are ways to tailor the tools to the type of question. And so that's really interesting, using I-ching for sort of a yes-no question. I know pendulum could be used that way. When you have somebody that's looking at a timeline, like when is that going to happen? What do you, other than intuitively, which I know you're fully capable of too, what other modalities do you go to for timeline stuff?
So it's excellent that you present it that way, because the modalities that I use really are designed to address certain ways in which most people will approach a question. So the I-ching is fantastic. It's a little more complicated than just the pendulum, although you can get the same results out of the pendulum as from the I-ching, and those two are great for, I want to know if I should do this or not do this.
And probably body basics like the muscle testing.
Absolutely.
Too.
And you can do a tremendous amount with the muscle testing, especially if you're looking at the energy of like food, or the energy of something that's going to be on your body or physically touching you. That you can use muscle testing to test how it works with or against your energy field. But I actually use it for past life regression work, because not everybody's comfortable using hypnotherapy. I'm not a practicing hypnotherapist, but I do have colleagues that are excellent that I recommend for people who want to do the hypnotherapy. But if they're a little bit concerned about the hypnotherapy, the muscle testing can be done to do the past life regression work in a very fully conscious state.
Yeah, I applaud that, actually, and I want to interject. I'm not anti-hypnotherapy. I think it's awesome for therapy, but for an altered state, I'm with you on that. It's not my favorite way to access the subconscious, because we're so subject to influence or suggestion when we open ourselves up like that. And we pick up, because each of us are psychic, way more information from the person doing, the therapist themselves too. So if they're not nearly like in a Buddha state, it's possible to pick up other information. I find it very interesting that you use muscle testing for that. That's really cool.
Well, and part of that is because I tend to be very difficult to get into a hypnotic state.
Yeah, me too.
I'm fairly resistant to it. So I needed a technique because I wanted to explore past life regression, but I had to find a way to sort of get past my conscious mind, because having an Aries Mercury along with an Aries Sun, along with about 7 other points in Aries, it's a little bit difficult for me to kind of give up my control.
Right, you're strong for people that aren't familiar. Aries, very shortly said, are leaders, and they don't really question their direction because they have such a sense of this way,
Right.
Yeah.
Well, to get back to your original question, so the tarot is what I will often suggest for people if they need to know something in the present moment, but they're wanting to also know something more for the immediate future. And I usually will say anywhere from 2 weeks to maybe up to 3 months if I'm really wanting to stretch it. And in a lot of ways, I also suggest people use the tarot when they're trying to understand the spiritual nature of a situation. So, for example, if someone comes to me and they want to know, will I get a job? That's really not a very good question to ask, because there's so much variability in the future. And if someone else is determining the outcome, you don't know what those variables are. So what I'll tell people to do to ask a good question is to say, what do you need to know from the tarot if you get the job? And what do you need to know from the tarot if you don't get the job? That way, you're going to be able to see what your lesson will be one way or the other, and you can be a little bit more comfortable about going forward because you don't have to have that anxiety of, well, if someone tells me this is going to happen and it doesn't, what does that mean? Or the idea of being put in a position where you're going to try to, in a way, outmaneuver the future. And part of our journey is to figure out our mystery.
Yes.
And so, I try to educate my clients to understand that it's really not about prediction in a concrete sense. It's more about spiritual direction. And that doesn't mean that we can't still address the question of a job opportunity or a relationship. It's just that I'm more interested in, and I get better results for clients when they're thinking about how is this part of my spiritual growth? What will it teach me if it goes this way or that way? And then that way you're prepared for any possible outcome. Absolutely. And then if you're wanting, right, and then if you're wanting something for a wider range of time, then that's absolutely astrology. I mean, with astrology, I can go back to when you were born, and I can go forward until you're 100 years old, and I can see where all the patterns are going to be and where the pressure is going to apply. But I'm also very, again, I bring up this point about prediction because I don't know if you caught the story, but the astrologers went out on a limb when they shouldn't have, and they predicted that Hillary Clinton was going to win the election. The highest level professional astrologers down in Los Angeles, they said, yes, we're going to do this. And I'm sitting there thinking, don't do it. Don't do that.
Exactly.
The thing I could predict about this year is that it was going to be a very unpredictable year.
Right.
And whatever looked like it would be the most Uranian or unpredictable outcome, I knew that was going to reveal itself in this year. And so, what was the most likely unpredictable outcome was going to be someone who's going to be an outsider actually being elected. And so now, whether that was going to be Trump or it could have been, a situation where someone completely even outside the system, Uranus can have that kind of effect. But what astrology can show me is what's going on pattern-wise for you a year at a time, many years in advance. I can see where patterns are applying themselves to particular areas of your life. So, for example, you might have a year that's highly focused on relationship, and your next year might be highly focused on your career. And then one year might be highly focused on family. Now, in reality, all of those things are, of course, interacting with one another. But from an astrological standpoint, there are times where energy will bring emphasis and focus to a certain part of your life. And that's what the astrology chart will show me, larger chunks of time and more complex dynamics. So that's how I use the different modalities based on what the client brings to me and what they have to ask.
Yeah, I find, for people that are not in the profession or the field, they may not realize that, different tools don't actually yield different answers in terms of overall picture, but they allow a different depth or angle of view, like a perspective on things. And I find I'm just in the process of playing with a class on numerology, tarot, and astrology, and because I wanted to learn the more left brain modalities. And it's really interesting that, and they're finding it interesting too, that, what we feel with our gut or our intuition matches up with those things if we'll free ourselves to do that. And, I've sort of realized that there are different tools follow the intuitive spectrum. And bear with me a second, like instinct is very basic. It's just yes, no, right? It's very, and body basics, feeling your gut, depending on your body to tell you the answer. And that's why pendulum and muscle testing and that works really well there. Then it goes kind of left brain, and there's the numerology, astrology, and tarot. And the left brain tools are very precise because it's related more with the analytical mind, but still is an intuitive tool. And then when you get into the psychic tools, where you can definitely take tarot into psychic because, different ways that you read the tarot and other things, spirit art, etc. And then, at some point, some people don't use tools, but it's not, it's very interesting. Like, I don't need tools, but I'm so interested to learn more about them. And that was part of my excitement about having, someone of your depth of knowledge about it on the show today. So.
Well, and I think, we all sort of come to things that are ways in which we are comfortable and what we also pursue for ourselves. So, I have an academic background. I did earn my doctorate some time ago in English. And so I have a particular kind of training that does appreciate that analysis and does appreciate the tools. And so that's part of how I came to them. And I found them to be really interesting in practical use. So, for example, I had a client speaking about numerology who contacted me, and her daughter was going to be born, and she had a list of names and wanted to do the numerology on the various names to find out how they would work with the numerology of the parents and her brother. And what was interesting is one of the names that they had selected had a Christ consciousness number associated with it. And what I told her, because the first when I said that to her, she perked up. She was like, "Oh, wow." I said, "Let me explain to you about having a Christ consciousness type of child in your family unit.
Right.
That may not be exactly what you necessarily want to have. I mean, it sounds very exciting. It was, it was a number that was going to be a master number and a couple of other combinations." I said, but understand that this is what the number brings to its energy, and this is how that number is going to react in your energy field. And so after we talked and we looked at all the different numbers of the names, and so she had 4, and 2 were easy to eliminate. They were definitely going to be conflicting numbers energetically within the family, so they were easy to be removed from the list. And then there were 2 that were left. One was the Christ consciousness name, and the other one was just a really good energy number for the family. And she selected that one rather than the Christ conscious number name. And the daughter is now almost a year and a half, and I stay in contact with them. They're a wonderful family, a client that I enjoy working with, and she's been very happy with. And that's, entering into using the tools in a very conscious way in thinking about, okay, we've got this new family member coming in, names have power. Yes. What if I decided I want to, be selective and thoughtful about that naming process? Could that facilitate better energy among the family? And of course, with what we do, the answer is yes, absolutely it will. That's a great reason why you would use the tool. Astrology, same thing. I had a client in Massachusetts that was going to get married and consulted with me about actually the time for him to propose marriage, a location. With astrology, I can do something called astrocartography, which is to look at a map in relation to your astrology chart and see where energy lines run that can help you accomplish certain things or help you understand why certain places resonate with you. So we found a spot for him to actually do the proposal. We picked a date on that. We then picked a date for the wedding itself, ended up out on the Boston Harbor. The day was absolutely fabulous. They had a wonderful start. And so, the tools, I think what's bringing them back into awareness to people is practical application.
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
It's like, well, what can this actually do for me? Well, it can actually help you understand how you communicate with one person to another person. With astrology, if I have your chart and my chart, like you were describing at the beginning of the show, if I go down a little bit more granular level and I know where your Mercury is and my Mercury is, I know how we communicate individually, and then I'll know how our communication energies work when we're around each other or we're talking on the phone like this.
Yeah.
So, of course, that can be great for relationships in your family, romantic relationships, relationships with employees and employers. The potential is just tremendous, and that's why I love doing the work.
Yeah, and I really liked what you were saying earlier about clients that are pulling on you or me for concrete answers, and it's like, just tell me yes or no. And the thing is, as a reader, I find it somewhat frustrating because sometimes it's not as simple as that. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's like, hell no, and sometimes
Yes.
It's like, go for it. But there are gray areas between, and the nuances in understanding why it is the way that it is a yes or a no, or if you go down this path, this result, or if you go down that path, that result. is much more useful to the person in the long run, because I can't imagine most people, would just like call up a reader and go, yes or no. And then, well, they told me no, so it must be no. Do you know what I mean? Like, people are intelligent. They want, even though they may not realize it, they need the context in order to be able to accept and digest the answer, especially if it's a difficult answer, one that they're not that keen on. Maybe all their energy is going to a yes, but the answer is no. Telling them no is kind of useless unless you explain what the underpinnings of that are. And I find the way that you integrate all these tools just to be so creative in using that.
Well, and you're right. The thing, I've encountered this particular answer that I sometimes have to give clients is they'll come in and they'll say, I'm struggling with this, I'm confused, help me find an answer. And I'll look at, say, their chart, or we'll draw cards, and the answer is, this is your time to be confused. That's actually their answer.
Right, like it's okay. Like, yeah, it's okay. And that, that
right.
brings me around to the concept of the tarot itself, because it's a story and it's a human experience, and I don't mean that facetiously, because that's the name of your deck, Tarot of the Human Experience. Tell everybody about what that human experience is, and just tell us something.
So I'll give you a little bit of quick history of the tarot that most people may not be familiar with. It's a card game. It originated in the 14th and 15th century in Europe, and it's similar to the card games you might play like spades or hearts, where you have trumps and tricks. So this was originally a card set developed for the aristocracy, because they were the ones that could afford to get cards made up, and usually they were paintings of the aristocracy members themselves, and they played it as a game. In the 18th century, the gypsies in southern Europe started to get a hold of the decks. Probably they just, through some sort of estate loss or maybe some sort of opportunity, as well as the printing press coming along and being able to print things, and they started using them for divination purposes or fortune telling. And some of that may have had a basis in spirituality, and some of it may have had a basis in con artistry. I'm sure there was a little bit of both, just like there is today. But I decided...
I'm
Go ahead.
so sorry. You're not going to lose your story because it's yours. I just want to say to the listeners, there is a lot of shadow about, like, wow, are they trying to rip you off and take your money, and they're just telling you a line of bullshit, But there are con artists and dishonest people in all levels of everything. Whether the typical stereotype of a used car dealer, no shame on real used car dealers, but the dishonesty occurs whether you're a judge, whether you're an attorney, whether you're a journalist, whether you're there are people that have integrity and there are people that don't have integrity, and you always have to use your judgment in those situations and in a reader situation. Does that person resonate with you? Do you come out of that reading feeling more depth of understanding and more peace and more whatever? Had to jump in there. Go on with the history of tarot.
That's quite all right.
Yeah, sorry.
No, that's all right. So essentially, what evolved into modern tarot is there are three primary basic decks. The one that most people would be familiar with would be the Rider-Waite Tarot. If anyone was ever given a deck, especially maybe 20 years ago, before decks really started to explode, they probably got a Rider-Waite deck. They might have got a Thoth deck. They might have got a Tarot of the Golden Dawn. And so almost all decks that exist now are essentially replications of those decks, but with new artwork or borrowing some sort of philosophy. Like, for example, you can get an Egyptian tarot, you can get a Greek tarot, you can get cat's tarot, dog's tarot, but at the base of it, they all sort of follow that Rider-Waite pattern or something similar to it. So when I decided to create the deck that I created, I wanted to think, well, what if you created a tarot deck intentionally as a spiritual tool and intentionally as a tool to be used in a spiritual or psychological practice. And so I wanted to create something that psychologists might be interested in using.
Yes.
And I had a background in photography. I learned and taught photography when I was at Carolina back in my undergraduate days. And I actually started working on the deck myself, but just because of circumstances and time and life, I never really was able to get it going. And then I had a chance encounter with a young woman who was a graduate student in graphic design who came to my book club. And I saw some of her photography and said, how would you like a graduate school project to work on this deck? And that's how we got together. Her name was Sasha Campbell. And she did all of the photography and all of the design for the deck itself. But the cards and the deck is built with the intention that it is trying to capture the themes that are familiar to us. And then through getting a card reading, when you sit down, whether you use my deck or you use a traditional deck, the idea is that you're going to experience creative knowing. You're going to go through a process of creative knowing. And part of how that's going to work is you sit down with a story, and the cards individually are a story. And then when we read cards for you, we put them in what's called a spread. And the spread is essentially laying out a story, like a series of chapters. So if you take the most basic one, like a 3-card spread, which is the past, the present, and the future, when I put the cards down that you've selected, then there's going to be a story there. And once I explain what that story shows me as the reader, you then can take that story and reflect it back on your own story, and that's where the magic happens.
Yes.
Because in that reflection, you may get reinforcement. You may sit down and go, I've got this really difficult question. I'm wondering if I should X. We draw the cards. You look at the cards. The cards give you the sense of, yes, this is the right direction for me to go in. I feel much more confident in making this decision. Or the cards might challenge you. The cards might show you something that says, you need to rethink that decision more carefully. Or have you considered this? And once in considering it, you realize, oh, I shouldn't go down that pathway. And then, of course, the most interesting thing that can sometimes happen is you sit down with a question that's like, I want to know about my relationship. I'm in this very intense relationship. And every card that you draw has to do with something with a career, which means that the question you think you're asking isn't really the question you need to get an answer for. It's actually something else. And that happens from time to time as well. So it's always a dynamic, creative, organic, and highly imaginative process. And I want to emphasize the imaginative part and the creative part because that's where the actual power takes place. And so, you know, when you talk about working with people, one of the things that I think is important for the people that are not the con artists is that we believe that our clients are fully self-actualized and capable people.
Absolutely.
And that they're responsible for creating and moving through their existence. And when they come to me or to you or to someone who does the work, we become fellow travelers. You invite us to travel with you, whether it's for 30 minutes or an hour or a couple of hours, or whether you build a relationship with us and you come back to us. You let us travel with you for a certain amount of time, and we are there to be a certain kind of helpful traveler, either through our life experience, through our talents, usually through a combination of our life experience or our talents. That's what we're really here to do. We're here to help you with our skills and with our experience to give you the best chance to move forward in as positive and complete a way as you can, even if you're having to move through a negative or difficult situation, which, as you know, is a lot of times where people come to us from.
Right, right. Phillip, perfect timing. We're going to pick this up on the other half of the hour. Your website is blackunicorn.com, and it's spelled very differently, BLACKUNYKORN.com. You guys can check it out during the break. Welcome back, Phillip.
Thank you.
I'm so happy. We were in the midst of talking about a little bit about the history of tarot and then the history of the creation of your deck. Did you have some other things that you wanted to embellish with there?
Well, one of the things that I, of course, have to share is just the amount of time. It was a 3-year project. And my hat's off to Sasha because we ended up having, the deck is a bit unusual. It has the 78 card structure that's common to the tarot, but I decided to incorporate a very particular way in which the story is told through each of the suits. So the first 5 cards of the suits, and there's 4 suits in the deck. One of the suits is air, one is water, one is fire, and one is earth, each representing different aspects of our incarnated experience. And the first 5 cards follow a consistent pattern, starting with the beginning, then the next phase is establishment. But once you get to the 6 through 10 cards, I actually did a positive card and a negative card. Rather than doing reversals, I actually split those cards where there's clearly a positive representation of energy and then a negative representation of energy. So she had to shoot 98 final versions, but to get those 98 final versions, she probably shot 300 different photographs that we then worked through. She got all the models together. This was quite a project to get it all done. And then the process, I actually tried to leverage Indiegogo, and I did get some support through an Indiegogo campaign to get the decks printed, because I did approach Llewellyn and another publisher, Schiffer Publishing, but there is a challenge of a couple things. One is the photographic decks are not very common, and the ones that do exist are not really professionally shot.
Right.
And then the other one is that I broke with the Rider-Waite tradition, so this is not going to be just another Rider-Waite deck with someone's really cool artwork representing the same pattern. So it is a stretch, but it's very intentional. And I want people to, if they look at the deck, if they explore what I've created, another thing that I wanted to make sure is that the deck could be put anywhere. This deck could be in anyone's home. It doesn't have any nudity to it. It doesn't have any imagery that is really aggressive or challenging. It doesn't pick any particular belief system and apply that. So it's really designed to be very modern, very approachable. And the other thing that I did with the deck that was important to me is that when people come to me, you mentioned about teaching. I tutor in tarot and I tutor in astrology.
Oh, great.
And with tarot tutoring, people will often ask, what deck should I start out with? Or I've been given a deck and I'll find out they've been given the Rider-Waite deck, which is a very difficult deck to learn.
Yeah.
And so there's a difference between what we would call esoteric, and I always like to explain what esoteric is by using my daughter's books. She used to read Fancy Nancy. So esoteric is a Fancy Nancy word for secret or hidden. So if you buy a deck and you can't look at the deck and see what the card means, it's an esoteric deck. The only way you can know what those cards mean is if you read the book or someone who's already using the deck explains it to you.
Yes.
And then there are visually accessible decks. The deck that I wanted to build was a visually accessible one, that when you look at the card, you'll see the meaning just by seeing how the photograph was shot.
Yes.
And there are other decks like that out there. The Osho Zen Tarot is one of my favorite decks to work with, especially if I'm doing something in public where there will be people that may be encountering tarot for the very first time.
Yes.
It's a beautiful deck, but the cards are very easy to understand, very easy to interpret. And so while I'm there to be an interpreter, I also want people to be able to look at the cards and get value themselves. And so visually accessible decks allow people to enter into learning the tarot more effectively. And tutoring people is trying to help them get comfortable realizing that anybody can learn to use the tool. It's just a matter of practice.
Even though you have created it in a highly approachable way, because I'm looking at pictures right now on the internet of your deck, I find the imagery sort of like a really good painting that kind of catches your attention and draws you into it. And because the photos are in black and white, it allows for a lot of interpretation or scrying of the cards also. So yes, the meaning of the card is really immediate, but it also isn't a boring, like one look, one answer kind of feeling thing. It really pulls you in. I just wanted to compliment you on that. Like I'm looking at 3 of the cards that are drawn, that are demonstrated here, and the image catches you. And I'm not doing that to promote your cards. I'm just genuinely intrigued by the images and As we mentioned before the show, I'm going to purchase one before we. I almost did it during the break, and I thought, no, Tracey, stay on task, stay on task. So, yeah, they are fantastic, really fantastic, and the black and white just draw it. It's awesome. You'll have to go online, people, and look. It's awesome. So.
Well, and part of that is from my own experience. When I started doing photography, I was drawn to the black and white because to me, it in a way made me pay more attention to the photograph itself. And so the other thing then is to work when you're doing something like this where I'm not the artist in this, I'm the co-creator. And you need to find someone that when you describe something, if they're going to be the artist, they need to be able to represent what you see through their art. And that's what Tasha did brilliantly. I mean, when I look at the photograph, it's the photograph I would have imagined. It's the way I would have wanted to capture it, but I didn't have the time and the inclination to do that part of it. And here, this young woman, she has such a great eye. And then she, again, put all the pieces together. Everything in this deck is intentional. The choice of doing the black and white photography, the layout of everything, the selection and the diversity of the models that we selected, all of it was intended to be as intentional as possible because we really did want to capture the human experience. And so, there are cards in there, like one of the cards that's my favorite is the flirting card. It's the Two of Water, and it's a shot of a couple sitting next to each other on the grass, and the shot is coming from their feet up. So their feet are in focus, and then they're sort of blurred out in the background, and they've got their feet touching each other, and the title of the card is Flirting. And then, one of the other cards I have in the deck is Betraying. And in that card, it's an image of a man, and he is slipping a wedding ring either on his finger or off his finger.
Oh,
and this is the other thing. The thing that I liked about the creation of the imagery is we don't know if he's putting the ring back on and the woman that's in the background is his wife, or if he's pulling the ring off and the woman in the background is his mistress.
Yes.
But part of what makes tarot powerful is that it isn't just the good things in life. We learn from a lot of different experiences, and so the intention of the deck was try to capture that wide range of human experience so that when you're doing a reading, you're able to really get into depth with people. And this is one of the things where I think people have an intuitive sense of the power of anything that we do, whether you're doing mediumship, whether you're doing tarot, whether you're doing palmistry, whatever it is. And I think if people are sensitive to understanding how strongly they can be moved by the experience.
Yes.
So you have probably heard this. I have heard this. I think anybody that does this work at a really professional level will at some point hear someone say, I was in therapy for whatever number of years they want to say they were in therapy, and you have gotten to my issue, or you have moved me across the issue, farther and faster than I experienced. And this is not to say anything negative about therapy. I've been in it. I had great experiences with it. I had terrible experiences. Just like you said earlier, there are people in all fields, whether we're talking about your car mechanic or whether we're talking about your psychologist, there are people that are genuine, and there are people who are not very good at their job, and there are people who are frauds.
Yes.
And so, but what I find is that because of our imagination, and the example I use is someone who has been to the doctor, I don't know how many times, they're a smoker. And of course the doctor says, quit smoking. Smoking's bad for you, right? And they, they listen to the doctor and they go back home and they smoke another pack of cigarettes that week. For whatever reason, on a whim, they decide to stop in at a reader somewhere. Maybe they give me a call, whatever it happens to be. And they say, I'm going to get this tarot reading. And they turn over the death card.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, that does sometimes actually mean death. It doesn't actually mean we're going to work our way around it and say it's about transformation. It is about transformation. Death is a type of transformation.
It can.
But that person, I bet you that person, after that card's turned over, doesn't smoke another cigarette.
Yes, yeah, and it's not intended to terrorize, but sometimes we
it's right.
in little bubbles. We just walk around and we don't notice changes in relationships, and we don't realize that we've let our body go, or we don't realize that we kind of need like a little wake up call to keep us at our best, to keep us happy, to be able to let go of things that aren't working anymore. People get entrenched in, well, we've been together for 20 years, so kind of wouldn't want to mess that up, but they're in misery. So,
Right.
Getting that fresh perspective, not only of them, but the situation and the other person and where they stand is very helpful in making a educated choice on what you want to do in life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then, the role of someone who does the work the way we do is to be a facilitator, to help people. Like when that card comes up, it's to help the person not be in a state of fear. It's to help them understand that this is a message that you're trying to understand, and it is significant. And what do you need to think about doing to address what that message is for you? Right. And how's the best way to move forward with that? But my point is that the experience is powerful.
Yes. I was just going to say,
people,
you shared an experience. I'm sorry, I don't mean to run over top of you. I'm just so excited.
Go right ahead.
You shared an experience when we were chatting about drawing the Tower card. Did you want to share about that?
I've got so many different things that have to do, because I use the cards for myself. I believe in them because I put them into my own experience. And the one that I can really absolutely share is not just a Tower experience is when something sudden or unexpected happens and you simply have to deal with it. And the Tower card represents that. My experience was I had a severe panic attack back in 2009, a truly debilitating experience. I was on the highway and had to pull off the road, had to call EMS. And it was essentially about 3 years before I was able to get through the whole of what the experience was.
Yes.
And, that experience was grounded in my spiritual growth. It was grounded in a lot of backlog of energy that I had allowed to build up. And one of the things that's sometimes really difficult to understand is things like what I experienced or the depressions that come along is they're really oftentimes intended to be a type of healing state that we are entering into to try to heal ourselves from something that we've gotten way out of balance.
I see.
And that was certainly the case for me. Now, in terms of tying it to card work, another example I can give is I was at one time still doing some teaching at Wake Technical Community College, a community college here in North Carolina, and I was doing astrology work, and I was sort of splitting the difference between the two. And so at a show, I had some downtime. I decided to do a reading for myself where I asked the question, should I pursue the community college full-time? Should I just put all my energy into getting a full-time position at the community college, or should I leave that behind and do my astrology and my tarot practice, my spiritual practice full-time? And then I asked the third line of the question, which was, should I try to do both? Now, what was interesting when I did the reading was that the Wake Tech cards, the answer was clearly, it will be safe, it will be boring, but you will have a regular paycheck.
Mm-hmm.
You will have security. That's what the card showed me. The one that was the spiritual path was the one that said it's higher risk, but it's going to be more rewarding. And it has the potential for you to be very successful doing it, but it also has the potential for you to feel always in a state of insecurity because you won't have a regular paycheck. So I thought, well, maybe this middle reading is going to be the answer. Absolutely not. Basically, what I found in that reading moment, this was 3 years ago before I started my full-time business, was that trying to split the difference was a disaster. It's like you either need to commit to being an educator or you need to commit to being a spiritual person, but this hybrid thing is not working. And it really wasn't. And so, that's where I reached a point in my life. And again, people often ask me, how often do you use the cards? Not that often, actually.
Right.
I use them when there is a key moment that I need to address, and I get what I need from that. And I'm still the final arbitrator.
Oh,
that
absolutely.
reading, showed me something I could have chosen, because the one thing I tell people about astrology is made up of 5 things. 4 of those things are data. One of them is the sign of the zodiac. One is the energy point, like the sun, the moon, Mars, Mercury. One is the house that it appears in, so the chart's broken down into 12 pieces called houses. And then there's the relationship between points called aspects. Those are four pieces of data. The fifth and most important part of astrology is free will.
Yes.
And so the same applies with tarot. The same applies with getting your palm read. The same applies with anything that you do. At the end of the day, you are the agent of action. And even if you went to say someone who was going to give you that yes/no answer, it's funny. I get a number of Indian clients because the Indian culture is very comfortable with astrology, and I'll get clients that come in, and they'll say to me, first they'll say, I was told by my astrologer from India that I was going to be married at 26. I'm 28 and I'm not married. And of course, humorously, I often respond and say, well, did you go get a refund? Because if they said you were going to get married at 26 and you didn't, you should go get your money back. But part of it is that it's challenging that mentality of, I'm not going to tell you when you're going to get married. I can, however, tell you the times in your life where a relationship energy or the possibility of that energy is at a high point and you can take advantage of it. But technically, you can go get married anytime you want. You can find someone on the street and say, hey, we're going down the justice of the peace. I'm going to grab a couple of witnesses and we're going to get married.
Right.
From the standpoint of doing anything, it's going to be, what's your agency?
Yes.
And so, the tools are there to empower you to be a more conscious decision maker, not to take your consciousness away. That's the essential
standing
point
ovation. Yes. Yeah.
Right.
I told you I'm just beginning to learn the left brain tools, right? So I had a question that I brought to my class because practical things are good to practice. And there were 4 people that day that pulled 3 cards, one to look at the present situation, one to look at what other people's opinions might be, and the final outcome, because I was debating moving forward to approach a particular building about creating a center. And what's interesting is I asked them beforehand, give me your gut. One of them felt no, one of them felt yes, and 2 of them were like, not yet. But when they pulled the cards, even though each of the 3 cards were different for each person, the collective was that, yes, it would happen, not now, but eventually. And if, reserve was used at this time, a lot of problems could be avoided. And that was really valuable information to me, and it helped me calm my fire about, what I was thinking. And, I think that the way that you've presented this definitely explains to people that you're not an automaton, we're not, and we as readers are not here to tell you what to do with your life. That's completely your choice. Free will is a beautiful thing, and all paths lead to Rome. So you'll get there eventually. Maybe in this lifetime, maybe not. So,
well, it's interesting. You made me think of something that I have a colleague that we did this because it interests us to do this, but we've known each other a long time, and she's a medium psychic like you are. And we are actually, right now for the holidays, we're offering, and we'll be doing this even after the holidays, so we're offering this combination reading where the person will sit down and do a tarot reading with me, and then they'll spend time with her getting a direct psychic mediumship reading. And we don't have any interaction with each other about the client. And what we find interesting is that if you're connecting with people who are doing the job well, the spiritual message will be consistent.
I wanted to say that earlier in the show. I was like, it's so weird because I have friends that are astrologers and tarot readers, etc., and we share clients, and our clients will say, oh my God, Tracey, you just told me what so-and-so just told me, or, and it's like, how, because, and people wonder, like, is it magic? Is it chance? No, they're just vibrational things that are, it's like a matrix of vibration. How would 4 people drawing the same 3, different 3 cards come to the same answer? There's no magic there. it's not really chance. It's what you said it beautifully earlier. Like
Jung actually described it as a synchronicity. There's an energy that's trying to synchronize in the world, and when we tune in, we can see it. And if we want to, we can actually check in with people who do tune in. That's really what you and I do. We spend a lot of our time being as tuned in as we possibly can, noticing messages and answers and collecting information. And we help people see what that looks like. And to me, a tarot reading or a psychic reading or any reading that you participate in is you are choosing a synchronistic moment.
For those of you listening, please remember it is never inappropriate to be kind, and without integrity, we have nothing. See you next week.